Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. I am super excited today to have Miss Marianne Lewis. Marianne, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Vicki. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, we're thrilled to have you and super excited to jump in and talk about all the amazing work that you've been working on. And I know you have a partner in crime who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. So we miss Wendy not being here, but she was confident that you would lead the conversation today. Yeah. So let me just give our audience a little bit of background on Marianne. So she is a dean and professor of management at Lindner. Did I say that right? Lindner College of Business. And that's at the University of Cincinnati. She previously served as a dean of Case Business School at City, University of London, and as a Fulbright scholar. She's a thought leader in organizational paradoxes, which we're going to talk a bit about today. She explores tensions and competing demands surrounding leadership and innovation. She's collaborating with international researchers and executives, and her work examines the management of paradoxes in context from product development and organizational change to governance and career development. She's also been recognized among the world's most cited researchers in her field, which is a Web of Science database, and received the Paper of the Year award in 2000. And Decade Award in 2021, good for you, from the Academy of Management Review. Her work also appears in such journals as the Harvard Business Review, Academy of Management Journal, and Organization Science. She's also earned her MBA from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University and her PhD from the Gatton College of Business and Economics at the University of Kentucky. She has 3 children and 2 grandchildren from her home base in Cincinnati. Anyway, great to have you, Marianne. We're thrilled that you've joined us today, and we have a lot to jump into. You and Wendy have been doing some incredible work, and you have this awesome book on both and thinking versus either or. But before we get into that, just share a bit about your background.
Sure. So Vicki, I'm an academic brat. I grew up on the coast, and my rebellion was I came to the Midwest. So I do love Cincinnati. I really started studying tensions when I started examining innovation. And Wendy Smith, my co-author, as you noted, was doing similarly. I was studying in organizations like Lego and different manufacturing settings, and she was studying IBM at the time in her PhD. And what we found was this pattern of tensions that we all face, competing demands. Now, we were studying them in organizations and typically at the C-suite. How do you manage for today and tomorrow? How do you manage your social responsibilities as well as your fiscal responsibilities? But this has been almost 25 years in the making. And what Wendy and I have found over that time is the kinds of tensions I just noted, we also live in our lives.
Yeah.
It's work and life. It's how do we manage to hit our, immediate goals, but also keep learning and growing. There are so many of these. And so the work that we were doing in organizations, we were finding was translating into our own lives, was much more about human behavior more broadly. So when we wrote this book, we wrote it for a broader audience because we think these patterns are pervasive and they're also critical to learn how to navigate.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more on that. And even probably that's amplified over the last couple of years compared to what it was, even when you started your research. Wow.
I agree.
Yeah. So let's just kind of get into the book. So, why as human beings do we actually get into this either or situation? And we see it all the time, right? People think they don't have choice. I run a course called Choiceology, and it's about teaching people how to make, how to figure out how all the different choices you have. And because we do have this mindset of either or. So I'm going to let you talk and share with us how you expanded on that.
Well, what we found is that really our human default is toward an either or. And so it isn't that you don't have any choice. It's that we typically see this binary choice, right? Do I focus on my work or my family? Do I focus on my immediate goals or a more long-term opportunity? Do I focus on efficiency or innovation? The list is so long, but our immediate reaction tends to be, and we think about this is actually kind of the mode of formal logic is, look, you put the two choices on kind of a scale. You list the pros and cons, you weigh them, you make a choice, and you move on.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that's human nature is that it gives you a sense of control. It feels like, okay, I can do this in a really systematic way. The problem is that most of the choices we're talking about aren't that binary. And in fact, that either or option is extremely limiting. It can also be actually rather destructive. It can lead us down a vicious cycle because we could make that choice today, but we're going to make it again tomorrow. Yeah. We're going to be pushed again in these same competing demands because they're not things that go away. Yeah. And that's why we turn to paradox, because that's a different kind of thinking rather than this dilemma.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And so maybe talk about that a little bit more about, so you started to get into this both and thinking. So just share with us a bit about that paradox and how you went about studying it even.
Well, it was interesting. And so I started a bit before Wendy. I met Wendy after I had already started some work in this area, and she was doing a dissertation. But as I was looking at this challenge, I actually went into studies of philosophy and psychology and mysticism. I mean, Buddhist and Taoist theology has so much insights into such challenges and competing demands. And what I found initially, and then Wendy joined and we started to see them everywhere, is actually, if you look at these opposing challenges as a paradox, so think yin yang, right? If you can kind of picture the yin yang in your mind, right? The two slivers of light and dark. Mm-hmm. The beauty of the Tai Chi symbol is that they actually form a whole, that the dark flows into the light flows into the dark. And as soon as you start to realize that, you see there's really a pattern of three elements into these kinds of decisions that we have. One, they're contradictory, right? You feel the tug of war and you need to think, what's at the ends of the rope, right? What's pulling? The second is to see them as interdependent, right? To see, for example, that decisions I make today affect tomorrow, just as my vision of what I want tomorrow to look like informs what I decide to do today. I mean, that's just one tension. And then the third element is that they're persistent. Because they're connected, they don't go away. Yeah. We always have to make choices, but if we look at them more as an ongoing journey and a process, one, it takes a little bit of the pressure off in the immediacy, but it also helps us realize it's about learning even more than it's about the specific decision making.
Yeah, so true, so true. And so many things show up, those different personas that we have when we're making decisions, right? Is it our ego talking? Is it our analyzer? Like who's being part of the decision making in the first place? So what are you seeing or what have you uncovered with respect to why, just our natural tendency often is to resist, right? Mm-hmm. Like we're so afraid of even taking that journey, to your point. It has to be defined.
No, it's a great question. So one of the ways that our research has gone is if we really started studying the either or challenges, we found that there's this vicious cycle that develops from that sort of thinking. Because as we make a choice, right, we weigh the pros and cons and we make a decision, what we find is that we tend to keep leaning in that favored direction.
Yeah,
it becomes preferred. It becomes more comfortable. And the more I'll take a classic with leadership, and it's actually more personal, is actually the work life, right? Mm-hmm. And as we keep leaning, we say, boy, but at this time in my career, I really have to be focusing on my job. I need to keep excelling. And the more I do that, it actually influences what I see. It influences your perceptions, right? It influences your identity, right? I'm this hardworking professional woman. I'm a leader in these realms. It influences your habits, right? So it starts to become routine. You even build it into routines more broadly in your life, over time. And the next thing you know, you've gone so far down what we call this the rabbit hole. You've gone so far down on one side that you wake up and you realize, oh my gosh, I've not taken care of myself. I've not taken care of the relationships that matter more. And then we tend to swing the pendulum. And oftentimes we can see ourselves swinging it quite hard.
Yeah.
I really need a break. I need to be focused on the kids, on my partner, my health, right? Whatever the case might be. And we call that the overcorrecting vicious cycle.
Mhm.
Because oftentimes we swing so hard that we actually harm some of the great work we've done on the other side.
Mhm.
We then find ourselves again going down another rabbit hole.
Mhm.
The third vicious cycle we see is more in teams and in organizations and actually in our world, which is polarization, is that it can be extremely hard working with others or other groups who are stuck in their own rabbit holes. So rather than listening and dialoguing from our different perspectives, we're actually defending, to your point, right? We actually put up the dukes because we find ourselves anxious and uncomfortable in the less preferred, less often traveled path. Even though in our minds, maybe it tends to be more subconscious, we know we need both.
Yeah.
It's just not in our vernacular, and it's certainly not in our habits.
Yeah. Wow. When you were saying that, so I had so many thoughts that were going through my head, Marianne. So, I mean, part of that too is you can see, like, especially in organizations where that fear comes up, right? Because people are like, oh my gosh, now maybe I'm not going to be as valuable as I was.
Mhm.
And so, if I'm not valuable to the tribe, they're going to kick me out, or to the group or the team,
Right.
or, whatever analogy we want to use. That's such a almost like at the core, right? That we get impacted by. And so how do we start to move from that either or into, having both, that both and thinking, right? And even if we go back to your example of, having family and career, like this comes up often in my work where clients will say to me, I'm at the peak of my career, or I'm on this trajectory,
Mhm.
but I've just gotten married and I want to have kids, but I'm being told I can't have kids and have my career. Right. And so how do we help people move into this different way of thinking and being?
Mhm.
Because I would say it's being.
I think you're absolutely right, Vicki. So the first step, Wendy and I always talk about, is you need to change the question. You really do need to think about how you're framing the challenge that you're facing. Because so often our approach is, we ask, do I, right? Do I focus here or here? Do I allocate my resources here or here? I mean, there's, right, but the do.
Mhm.
Changing the question to how. How could I thrive in my work and have a happy home life? How can I hit my targets for today and keep learning? Right. And it sounds like it's a simple couple of words changing, but it's really about a mindset.
For
We call it
sure.
the paradox mindset. And we found, actually, we've done a lot of research. We've operationalized it so we can study it in a survey. And we've studied people, thousands of people in different languages, different cultures. And what we find is that actually people who approach these challenges as paradox, they think about them as an opportunity to explore new ways of accommodating the opposing challenges. They're actually, according to their supervisors, they perform better and they're more innovative. But according to themselves, they're more satisfied. So we
Oh,
find that
that's interesting.
isn't it? I mean, these are pretty substantial findings that we keep testing them in different contexts. But that changing the question is really key. I mean, you just said, I throw out a different example that I was talking to some women executives recently, and I love the way one of them framed this challenge between what we call performing and learning, right? So performing, the woman said, it's really the tension between, do you keep your head down or do you pull it up, right? Do you put your head down, focus on the targets at hand, really make sure that you're excelling, proving your worth. This was some of the language that these execs were sharing.
Mhm.
But I need to keep learning. I need to keep, I need to look up and do some boundary spanning. What's going on around me? What do I need to keep changing and developing in myself, my teammates, right? My organization. And if you think about those two as a paradox, right? Clearly you need the short term. There's so much to hitting those targets that you hone your skills, right? You do prove your value in a host of ways. And how are you going to make sure that you're not caught flat-footed, because the world is always changing around us, from
Yeah.
technologies to our world to our own energy.
Yeah.
Right? It's a
Absolutely.
recipe for burnout, just putting your head down. It also doesn't set you up for the next position, even by doing exceptionally well, because you haven't proved that you're also good at keeping your eyes open, right? And continuing to explore. So in that particular conversation, we really had a dialogue about, okay, so if the question was, how can I hit my targets and continue to learn? This is like juggling. You can't do those two things literally at the simultaneous same moment. But you can start to say, are there creative ways that I can make time and space for one or the other? And we call that separating and connecting. So
Okay.
some of the women that I've worked with recently in this particular group talked about doing micro sabbaticals, right? How do they take shorter breaks, not as vacations, but literally to go have, I mean, in academia, we do this all the time, but I love that organizations are getting smart enough to say, you know, if you say, I could really use a couple of weeks, even a month, to go explore. I need to figure out what's happening in my field, in the world around me. I want to go see what's happening in some other contexts. I will be much more valuable when I get back. Yeah. And with insights, with energy, with options for the future. But that's a different kind of approach. It's not saying step off the track.
Yeah.
Right? It's how could you do this in smaller ways? And the connecting is, and seeing that they're actually part of your journey as a leader, right? As a professional.
Yes, exactly. Because you're modeling for next generations. Like there's so many things in what you just shared there. And I think oftentimes when we get on that hamster wheel, we're so afraid to go off the hamster wheel because it's like, if I get off of it, I'm going to be replaced, right? And it's not recognizing that you actually are making yourself more valuable. Another analogy I like to use, and you know, I mean, I spent almost 30 years in corporate myself before I do the work I'm doing now. And I used to train my people to say, you need to hire somebody better than you because they need to take your place. And people would freeze because they would be like, what do you mean somebody should take my place? And it's like, yes, so that you can step up to the next challenge or to the next part of your journey or stage of life, or however you want to categorize that. But that's such a hard decision for people to make. Like, even with that, there's a lot of tension, back to your point, right? There's that tension of what's the cost, and we go to a negative place usually on what that cost might be versus what's the potentiality if I take this step.
I love that language, Vicki, because we do think that a big key to the negative cycles is this fear base. Yeah. Is this, I have to defend. But boy, it limits us in so many ways versus an abundance mindset, right? Versus a learning orientation where we say, but what's possible? And, you know, the other piece is there will be failures, right? You will have challenges as you do this, but it's building the confidence to know when they happen, you get up again. And actually every failure is an opportunity for learning. Yeah. And I don't want to sound like Pollyanna here, because I'm not saying these are easy. In fact, we found in our research that one of the greatest challenges of both and thinking is managing emotions. Yeah. In this process, our own and those around us.
That's what I was getting ready to say. Yeah. Because it's that external narrative often that, you know, people say, are you crazy? Like even at a young age, right? Like I'll just share an example that happened the other night. My daughter, my youngest, is getting ready to go to university, right? And she's like, I want to do film and TV. And all her network around her is saying, no, you should do psychology because that's more stable. And I said to her, like, you can't listen to what everybody else says. It's what drives you. Like, what do you really want? Right. But we do that. We let those external voices. And then later in life, if it's something you're really passionate about, then you have those regrets. Right. And I said to her, I said, you might have 5 careers or 6 careers in your lifetime. Just go experiment.
And what a wonderful place to do it as a university, right? Yes. But I think that I mean, it's something that I take to heart every day as, dean of a business school, is how do we help build those type of habits early in people? I mean, right, the average US student changes majors 5 times.
Yeah.
It's okay. Let's see if we can't get through 4 of them in your first year.
Yeah.
Right? Let's realize that all you're doing with every experience is deciding almost sometimes more what you don't like or don't think you're particularly strong at, because you're winnowing down what is an infinite array of possibilities, which is both beautiful and paralyzing.
100%.
And I think we get paralyzed on the opposite side when we're older, right? We get paralyzed with what we think we know. So it's 2 different sides of that continuum.
Yes. Well, I will say for myself, the older I get, the less I know.
But that's wisdom, right?
Right? Because you go, wow, I thought I knew everything when I was in my 30s. And then you get in your 50s and you go, yeah, I don't know anything. There's so much to explore, so much to learn.
But I love that you say that, because I often share that with my students. It's I think it's a Buddhist saying, it's the paradox of knowledge. The more you know you don't know.
Yeah.
Right. But that's eye-opening, and it actually helps reduce that fear.
Yes,
because
I was getting ready to say that.
you
Yes.
recognize it's natural. It's okay. That means it really is about exploring.
And it gives you more freedom, right? Because you can then be open to a variety of perspectives. So, just tying it back to your book, instead of either or, you go to both, right? To both and thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you can come from that space of both and, that creates so much more of a opportunity, possibility. It's not limiting, right? Where when we get into either or, it's like, okay, now the box has just been created around me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I would note with that, sometimes, and this tends to happen particularly when we're talking with women execs, they'll say, so, but it does sound like and just means adding more to the plate. And that's really not what we're trying to say, because I think that's one of the great challenges. We can add far too much to our plate. So some of it, we talk about building guardrails, right? How do you build some boundaries around what you do so that you are not just constantly adding more to the plate?
Yeah.
And I mean, one of those boundaries is a vision and purpose. And what is it you really are seeking? And that's a harder question probably when you're younger, but you need to start asking it actually earlier, and ask it the rest of your life, right? Am I going in the direction I want to be going? Is that adding to my purpose? If not, it doesn't come on the plate.
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So vision is a really key piece. The other, as a leader, is more the guardrails for either if it's a team or particular goals. How do you keep them focused enough that people can truly dive deeply, add value, even as they're exploring with breadth around those areas? Because if anything goes, everything goes, and it's actually too much.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And actually, when you were just saying that about, from a leadership perspective, it's really helping your people uncover where their strengths are and helping them focus that in a way so that they can be doing the things that they're best at more often than the things that they're not good at, or, you know what I mean? Like that's such an important component to leadership in my mind anyway. And you help guide people, right? Like, what is your purpose? Like if you're, let's say an arranger, how are you using that in your work every day? How do you help others when they're not an arranger and they're disorganized, or they struggle with, pulling things together? Like, so really helping them see that, because that ties into the both and thinking as well, the way I am hearing it anyway.
No, I would agree. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Wow. And so you've written the book, and the book has launched, correct?
It has.
So where can people find both and thinking so they can expand their knowledge?
They can find it on Amazon, on Audible. I mean, we've got it in a host of places. I'll show the copy just so you
perfect.
see looking. And it's been a pleasure, because we did write it for a broader audience. So the opportunity to talk about the kind of tensions we deal with on a regular basis, it's building my own paradox of knowledge. But I'm also proud to see that the patterns continue, and the ways of navigating through both and thinking add a great deal. Maybe one piece I would add to that is what we see the outcomes of both and
Okay,
thinking.
I was just getting ready to ask you that. Perfect. Okay, let's go.
Let me do that, because we see two different outcomes to a both and thinking approach. One is creative integration. So we use the analogy of a mule, right? This is the best of both worlds kind of approach, right? Smarter than a donkey, stronger than a horse, right? Is kind of the idea of a mule. And they do happen. They're wonderful. It's those epiphany moments, like a micro sabbatical, where you say, oh, there's some way that I can do this. Or, I decide I'm going to manage work and family because I'm going to bring my partner with me to a conference. Or, those are great kind of win-wins. The other piece of that analogy of a mule is that they're sterile. A mule is sterile, which means that they're one-offs. They absolutely add value. And when they happen, you can grab onto them and use them. But you'll need another one in the future, because you'll have to renegotiate that tension again. Yeah. So the second approach that we see, we call consistent inconsistency. And this is particularly vital for leaders. And we've seen remarkable examples of great leaders who are really good at this. And the analogy we use is tightrope walking. So if you can picture a tightrope walker, one of the keys to a tightrope walker is they have a vision. They're looking ahead into the horizon. And then they're doing these micro shifts between the opposing issues, between work and family, today and tomorrow, performing and learning, and with some guardrails so they don't lean too far, because you lean too far, you're going to fall off. You're going to go down one of those rabbit holes. They're, as leaders, communicating, yes, I am doing both. We are moving towards this broader vision. We are going to keep focusing on efficiency and creativity. And we're going to do this in this way that is, there's method to the madness. And with every step forward, every shift slightly to each side, we're learning through that process. And ideally, we're learning together, and it becomes part of our own journey and our collective journey.
I love that. I love that visual too, right? Especially the tightrope, right? Because that's a really powerful, because if you look down, you're done.
Exactly. No.
You got to keep looking ahead, right? What's ahead of you?
Where are you heading?
Where are you heading? So that's a really, really beautiful example. So Marianne, you and I could spend a long time talking about this, because you're also talking my passion. So what might be a couple of things that our audience could take baby steps in moving from either or to both and thinking? What would you share?
I mean, the first, I'd go back to really thinking about the questions you're asking yourself. Are you positioning them as this binary either or? And what would be the value of shifting to an and question? How could I? Start to open your possibilities. And then with confidence, start to look at the tightrope walking. How can I be moving forward with a vision for where I want to go and shifting between the challenges that I face? Because they're not going away. And rather than be paralyzed with them, understand that is part of our human existence. It's part of the journey. And you will get better with every step, because you will learn, you will build confidence and resilience in that process.
Love that. Love that. You actually just reminded me of someone I was speaking to several years ago, because I think this is where people get stuck. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to someone, she had just left her job. And I said, what do you really want to do? And it went dead quiet. And I thought, did we get disconnected? What happened here? And she took her a minute and she kind of cleared her throat and she goes, I'm actually embarrassed to say this to you. She said, but first of all, no one's ever asked me what I want to do. And she said, and secondly, I've never thought about it. She goes, life has just happened. And that was like a really, really powerful conversation we had. And I said to her, you're at a very interesting place in your life right now to where you can start to think about, what do you want to do? How can you? So I love how you reframe that to the question, because the questions we ask ourselves will either propel us or it can paralyze us.
Oh, agreed.
Yeah. So I love that. That's very, very powerful. Anything else that you would want to share with our audience?
Well, I would just say, Vicki, I mean, I love your podcast. I think the work that you do is important, especially, I mean, I do women's organizations here in Cincinnati. I did them in London and Dubai. And what we find is very similar patterns, even among very different individuals. And I hope that we can continue to support each other
Oh,
and
I
be
love
good to
that.
ourselves in this process, because it's not easy. And at the same time, I think sometimes we should, don't believe everything you think, because
Yes.
we're so harsh on ourselves in this process, and that will reinforce an either or, and more likely it will push us to one particular side of that or, and forget the needs of the other. And it really is a more holistic existence that we're seeking here. It will help us thrive much more as individuals over the long term.
And that's why we're here. We're here to thrive. It shouldn't be hard. I love it. That's great, great advice, Marianne. And thank you for that. And, what I would want our audience to walk away with too is get the book, Both and Thinking, and, look at how do you start to take those baby steps and really challenge yourself. Like when you catch yourself being highly conscious, if you're thinking that either or, move away from that and look at what are the possibilities. Your life will be much fuller and much richer if you can do that. And if you're struggling to do that on your own, reach out to somebody that will support you. You can always reach out to me, Marianne, Wendy. Like there's so many of us women that want to support each other, and don't be afraid to reach out and ask for, guidance or help. I mean, that's what we're here to support each other, right? Because we're all stronger and better together. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these kind of practices, we're talking about them at the individual level, that they matter enormously at the team and organizational level. I mean,
100%.
it's the same pattern across levels, but it has to start with ourselves. If we can't practice this personally, we can't demonstrate it in our teams or build it into our organizational cultures, practices, and structures.
Yes, absolutely. Well said. Well said. Thank you. Marianne, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you've got like a crazy packed schedule, and I'm grateful that you were able to join us. And Wendy, we have you here in spirit. You've got lots of things on the go, and we understand that, but we're grateful that you ladies have done the research that you've done, and that you were willing to come on and share that with our audience. So thank you again for that.
Thank you again, Wendy. All the best.
So everyone, thank you so much for joining the WIL Talk podcast today. Again, that was Marianne Lewis, and she's the co-author of Both and Thinking with Wendy Smith. And please, if you have questions, dig into the book. You can reach out. But we know you have a choice as to what podcast you listen to, and we're super grateful that you join us on the WIL Talk podcast. And we look forward to seeing you on the next show. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.